Let's make a French knot. Okay, so poke your needle up from the back to the front of the fabric where you want your French knot to be, and draw through all of that working thread so that your knot's holding your thread nice and secure at the back. Okay, so with this technique, I'm holding the needle with my stitching hand, and my other hand is actually going to be really helpful. So let's get started with that other hand. Just gently hold the working thread near where it comes out of the fabric. Just hold on a little bit of tension. Okay, so now with our stitching hand, we want to hold our needle reasonably parallel to the fabric. And so the point of our needle's facing our other hand. We don't want the needle up here above the thread. We want it under the thread. And you can just kind of lean the thread against the needle using your other hand to do that. And it's about a third of the way up the needle. Okay, so now we're going to hold still with our stitching hand, and we're going to wrap the thread once and then twice around the needle with our other hand. And I'm just holding a little bit of tension on here. So I'm holding a bit of tension with my other hand, and I'm kind of pushing back a bit with my stitching hand, and everything's just staying in place. You're doing great, so just keep at it. Now, we want to hold that tension on, but we're actually going to move the needle back and poke the tip in just beside where we came up. So I've poked that tip in, and now I'm going to stand the needle up and push it about a third of the way in. As I do that, I'm pulling on a little bit of tension with my other hand, and see how the wraps that I had made around the needle, they've actually traveled down and they're sitting on the fabric. So now you can kind of see what's going to happen as we make our French knot. So I'm going to push the needle down a bit more. It's about a third to a half of the way through now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm still holding onto the needle with my other hand. I'm just going to hold the thread where it's coming out of the fabric, just nice and firmly against the fabric. I'm holding the edge of the hoop. So now I can actually let go with my stitching hand, and my other hand's just holding everything nice and securely in place. Okay, so I'll actually poke the needle most of the way through now, still holding on with my other hand, and I'm going to reach underneath with my stitching hand, and I'm going to grab the needle. So at this point, you want to make sure that you're not holding too tight with your other hand and like choking the needle with your wraps. Just want a gentle amount of pressure. And now I'm going to pull the needle through to the underside with my stitching hand. I'm going to give it a little swivel for this first bit because it can be a little bit tricky to get it through. I can feel now that it's popped through, and so has the tail of thread. And so I'm just going to gently draw that working thread to the underside. I've been using my other hand to hold things in place, but we're under control now, so I can let go and just really slowly pull that working thread through. And hey, look at that, we've made a French knot. I want to make a couple more French knots and give you even more tips along the way. So I'm bringing my needle up where I'd like my next French knot to sit. Okay, so let's just go through it once more. I'm going to hold on a bit of pressure with my other hand. I've got the needle in my stitching hand, and I'm holding it parallel to the fabric, and it's actually pointing to the left. I'm just going to lean it against that working thread. I'm going to go down and around the needle twice. So once and twice, and everything's just being held in place here with the tension between my hands. French knots are all about the tension. So now I'm going to back the needle up and go down just beside where I came up. Now, if you poke your needle into the same hole, you could have problems and your French knot will disappear to the underside of your fabric. So make sure you're just beside, not in the same hole. I'm going to poke the needle down a little bit, and then remember I'm pulling on a bit more tension with my other hand, and I'm going to stand my needle up and look at how those wraps have just made their way onto the surface of the fabric. So I'm going to poke the needle down a bit more. I'm using my other hand to hold that lovely tension by pressing the working thread against the fabric, and I'm holding the side of my hoop. Now I'm going to poke my needle most of the way through. Everything's in place here, we're all good. Reach underneath with your stitching hand. And that first little part as you try to pop the needle through to the underside of the fabric can be the trickiest. So what I want you to do is give it a little corkscrew. See how it's just kind of going swivel, swivel, swivel. That's what I want to do as I do my first tug through. And don't hold too tight. Like if I really pulled the tension on with my other hand, you can imagine it's going to choke that needle and it can't pull through. So I don't want too much tension, but just enough to hold things in place. So I'm going to go swivel, swivel, swivel. And it's just as that tail disappears, you feel it pop. And then you want to slowly pull through the thread all to the bottom. If you go really fast, sometimes you end up with little bubbles on top. So just go slowly and it should all draw through to the back and you're left with that nice French knot shape. One more thing I want to show you is where you actually place your French knot. So let's say we've brought my needle up on the spot where we want the knot to be, okay? And remember, once we've done some wraps, we'll be poking the needle back down just beside. So your knot is basically going to sit in between where you come up and where you go down. So you can actually, you can adjust this as you go. And if you're a total beginner, do not worry too much about this. Any French knot you make will be amazing, no matter how it looks. But if you're feeling a little bit more confident, you can have a play with this. So remember, we're going to wrap once and then twice around the needle, okay? Now, if I poke my needle down there, remember we just poke it in a little bit and then we can draw on some tension and we can see where those wraps are sitting. So that's where my French knot's going to be. But let's say, oh, that's too far to the left. I can actually take my needle out. I haven't committed yet. Let's go wrap again, 1, 2, and this time I'm going to poke my needle down on the other side. And so now, you can't probably tell too much, but now the knot is sitting to the right a bit. So you can kind of have a play with that with your placement, especially if you're like working along a line or you're creating an outline. And then I can make my knot where I want it to go. So that's just a little tip you might find helpful.